Right, hello and welcome to this ever-increasing number of videos. What I want to introduce you in this one is what I, for want of a better name, have called the ElectrOboe. It's another project from the Boxford Resource Centre, and the idea of this particular project is really to do a number of things. Later on we'll actually discuss the prototypes, but it was originally born from meeting or seeing online an instrument called an Eigenharp. Now the Eigenharp was what can only be described as radically different, although in reality what they do, the more you looked into it, the more you realised that what they'd done was effectively taking a pad where there was a matrix of keys and put that on effectively a stick. So I looked at that and initially I thought, well, it's a beautiful piece of kit, but you know, would it be nice to actually be able to do something in schools? Because I think they're just short of £5,000 to buy, which is a big lump in any school's budget. And as part of the philosophy that I'm now trying to introduce to D&T, we should really be able to make anything. We've got the machines, it's purely a matter of sitting down and putting the pieces together to finally end up with something that is literally almost as good as you get in industry. So, hence the finished product called the ElectrOboe. Now, one of the things that the Eigenharp has is that each one of these keys, or its keys, has 5 functions. On the Eigenharp, you press to get the actual musical note, and then as you rock the individual key, it brings in filters, it brings in expression, which was how I originally intended to build the ElectrOboe, but very quickly realised that just having the 4 functions was limiting the possibilities of what this project could do, and it meant that the switches were a little bit cumbersome. The other problem I also got is when you press the switch down, you get a contact, but as you roll the switch on those particular switches, it loses the centre contact. So to actually use this as an expression was also not going to work. So initially I thought the project was dead in the water at that point, and put the project down and almost forgot it for over a year. And it was only as we were coming up to this D&T show that I realised that I had to pick it up off the shelf, plug it into the workstation, and realised that possibly if I could get more out of each key, I was on something. Now then, I'll explain a little bit about how it actually transmits. You'll notice I'm sat in my little music studio. If you're used to the Boxford projects, you'll recognise the VST station, which is one of the projects to house the way that music is going now, which is very much towards virtual instruments on computers. And then just slightly out of shot is the old keyboard stand with a couple of the standard older type of keyboard where the actual sound is produced in the keyboard as opposed to in the computer. At the moment there's 2 connections. We've got a power connection going in, and then I've got a MIDI connection going out and via a MIDI converter going through to this computer. The computer has actually got a VST package on there called Native Instruments, and in that I've loaded some French horns and I've also loaded some strings. So having given you sort of the bass, let's actually see how it sounds, and I'm hoping that the microphone on the camera will pick it up. If not, we may have to dub the sound on later and actually show this separately. But as I said, each key has 5 functions. I find it easy to play with it on my knee, but in reality it could easily be put as a guitar strap. Part of the idea is that you can take this to the front of the stage and be running synthesizers, because it is producing what's called standard MIDI. So the actual machine itself makes no sounds at all. All it does is literally issue key commands, just like a keyboard does that's plugged into a computer. It does, as you press your letters, they just go down to the computer and then it turns them into something on the screen. This does exactly the same thing, except depending on what you've got it hooked up, as to what, it depends what sound comes out. So if the key goes forward, we get a nice single note. Now because the chip in here can be programmed to do anything, I decided that on pulling the key back, I would actually program that to issue a chord. If the key goes left or right, it actually picks the 3 notes up. So in reality, each key has 3 note chords on it, and then the press down and the forward are single notes. Press down, go forward, so within a fairly small area you've got quite a lot of flexibility. The other thing that then became apparent was because of the way that this is set up, it actually doesn't lend itself to people who have already learned how to play. Because the keys don't function like a normal keyboard, if you've got students who want to get into music but are very much put off by the kids who already are showing a lot of skill in music, I will always remember when I was young, you'd sit down on a piano having just heard somebody bash out something extremely complex and your little chopsticks sounded extremely poor. The advantage to this is that nobody has got a head start, because the way the keyboard is laid out and the way that it functions very much invites people in that have not played before. Plus, because you can have chords, it has that bon tempi edge where you can actually add complexity for not a lot of movement. I've also added 5 buttons up the top, and because again every button on this system is totally programmable, these buttons cause the program to jump into different areas, so that if I use the bottom 3, and again everything runs in binary, those 3 will make a binary number between 0 as it is now and 7 with all 3 pressed down. What it does is alter the chord. So that within that very small area, without having to learn chords, you can create chords and create a mood. Now I'm still very much getting used to this myself. But what I also did was add in the possibility to go to single notes, so that if you're working with synthesizers that have very strong sounds, you don't have to have the chords. And this is the standard piece of software that is on the site to download, comes with all this set into it. I also decided using this button here that this would actually change the channel number, which gives us the strings. Now because of the way the Native Instruments is set up, it actually only uses the centre section, and a certain amount of that is that the strings, if you go up here, we're really getting outside the strings range. Almost, we're struggling. and certainly on some sampled instruments you'll find that the middle is the only section that will come alive, partly because the instrument outside that actually can't make the notes. Now on the native instruments, those middle 4 keys of that bottom 8, instead of actually triggering notes, actually trigger the system to go into different expressions within the violin. So if we start out as it is, very much as before, if I then select which that's a feature of the software, that's a feature of the system, but because it is standard MIDI, you can use these standard things to actually make the instrument even more expressive. So within the basic instrument you do have a lot of power. You can also make this in, because of the way that it's designed, you can make it in blocks of 8. So in other words, you can have a keyboard that's 8 keys long, 16, 24, or as this is 32. The software that is running in there is also only very basic. It's literally as easy to program as you could imagine, and there's only about 24 lines of software that actually does all this, because the way that I've designed the actual electronics is that down there and down there are 2, effectively what are known as buses, which are just lines of copper, that the diodes inside from each switch just create a binary number using the standard binary bus. That means that the chip just literally sees a number come in, and all it has to do is then decide, do I send that number straight out, do I move it up and down because of where we want the keyboard, or do I add 2 other numbers to it to make the chord. The nice thing is, of course, that just as it will quite happily run the VST, if I now unplug and plug in what's called a wave station, which this is a keyboard that is literally 25 years old, it'll just as easily play that. And I'm actually now playing this keyboard here. So any keyboard that the school has can easily be adapted and played off the ElectrOboe, which again brings you kids that can't play into being able to use quite advanced pieces of gear. And if I move over here and move this up to a different instrument, and there it is, of course, because the VST is listening, I think. No, it may not be on the same MIDI channel. No, it's. I thought I might be able to do something clever there, but I can't. If I did have it on the same MIDI, I could actually have the channel 1 control one keyboard and channel 2 control a separate keyboard, so that you could actually have 2 totally different instruments on the one thing, just as we did with the VST. Voices I don't think are as good. They are showing a little bit of their age, but what I did want to show was this will literally plug into any MIDI device and run it straight off the back of the machine. No interfaces required. So that sort of gives you the outline of the project. It is intended to try and get people into music. It also is down the route of we can make anything and make it look good. This is the final prototype. this was the one we took to the show. The final version I'm hoping to either make out of one piece, or alternatively it'll have the grain matched perfectly, because I'm not 100% happy with the grain on this. But everything that's in there has been made, with the exception of the switches and the electronics, which the electronics could be made on a machine, but with the exception of the switches which are bought in, everything, even the buttons, were made on the lathe. So laser cut sections, everything's possible within the machines that we've got.